Hello, everyone. Hello. You know, we get lucky and we get the session right after lunch. That is not fair. So no falling asleep, please. We would appreciate that, or at least no snoring. So my name's Renee Schultz. I'm an institutional improvement specialist with the department out of the San Francisco Regional Office. And with me is Kai Kimbrough.
Hello.
And Kai is out of Washington, D.C., and she's with our Performance Improvement Group. And also with us somewhere is Susan Bowder, and Susan is one of our, is also with the same group that Kai is with, but she's out of Seattle. But all of us work primarily in the area of eligibility. So if you don't mind, we're gonna sit down through the presentation. Lots of walking, lots of walking. So how many of you are relatively new to the whole process of dealing with the EAP? Anybody? Okay. It kind of gives us an idea, and I know it's a little, you don't use it that often, right? So when you get back into it, it can be a little intimidating. So hopefully this session, we're gonna talk about that a little bit. We'll talk about the EAP, and we're gonna talk about a lot of other things. But we are gonna be covering a lot of information. So we would ask if you would be so kind as to hold your questions until the end, and then we'll ask you to step up to the mic and ask your questions. And we'll also ask you to tell us, if you could, your name and your type of school, whether you're public, proprietary, private, nonprofit, etc. It helps us to better answer your question, because there are differences sometimes when we give that answer. And if your question is really specific to your institution, then I would ask that you catch us offline afterwards, or head to the Resource Center to the eligibility table. So now I gotta learn how to use this new clicker. There we go. So in order for a student to be eligible for Title IV, federal student aid, they also have to attend a school that is eligible. So if your school is eligible for federal student aid and the students are eligible, you have the happy students on your left. If your school loses their eligibility and a student wants to attend your school, they cannot get financial aid. And that makes them very unhappy, like the picture on the right. While I'm making light of the situation, it is truly an important thing to maintain your school's eligibility so that students can access the federal student aid that they're eligible for when they attend your school. So here's what we plan to cover in our session today. Eligibility requirements, in other words, what it takes to be an eligible institution. We'll discuss the basics. Not everyone is sure what the difference is between an EAP, the ECAR, the PPA, so we'll talk about that. We'll also talk about why and when you need to update the EAP, also known as the electronic application, and about the many different considerations when making those updates. We'll talk about recertification and how that works and the requirements involved. And lastly, we'll share the common mistakes we see when we are reviewing EAPs from all types of schools, and that can cause delays in processing your application. So first, let's talk about what makes a school an eligible institution for purposes of federal student aid. So per the 34 CFRs, Part 600, any institution that meets these requirements in order to participate in federal student aid, these basic requirements are the same whether you're defined as an institution of higher education, a proprietary institution, or if you're considered a post-secondary vocational institution. So again, regardless of what type of school you are, you must be legally authorized by a state as a post-secondary school, be accredited, provide an eligible program, at least one, and admit as regular students only individuals with a high school diploma or its recognized equivalent, or individuals beyond the age of compulsory school attendance in the state in which the school is located. So in 34 CFR 600.7, we talk about several limitations which can affect a school's eligibility. An otherwise eligible institution that does not offer at least an associate's degree becomes ineligible if it violates, among other requirements, the incarcerated student limitation of 25%, or the correspondence school limitation of 50%, or the correspondence student limitation of 50%. So the question is, what's the difference? What's the definition of correspondence? So Volume 2 of the handbook defines it as a correspondence course is a home study course for which the school provides instructional materials, including examinations on the materials, to students who are not physically attending classes at the school. Interaction between the instructor and student is limited, not regular and substantive, and primarily initiated by the student. And you can find a definition of that real clearly in Volume 2, roughly page 2-36. So waivers are available for the correspondence student limitation, the incarcerated student limitation, and the limitation on students without a high school diploma or equivalent. And also, a school is not eligible if it files for relief from bankruptcy or has entered against it an order for bankruptcy. The school is also ineligible if either of these circumstances apply to an affiliate of the school that has the power by contract or management or ownership authority to direct or cause the direction of the management of policies of the school. It's always a good idea to check officials for debarment, so that's something we do internally, is we do check to determine if any officials in the higher levels of the school, or owners for that matter, have been debarred. So debarment happens when an official has pled guilty or nolo contendere to or found guilty of a crime involving the acquisition, use, or expenditure of FSA program funds, or has been judicially determined to have committed fraud involving FSA program funds. So keep in mind that any of you can check for a potential office official's debarment on sam.gov. You all heard, have you guys heard of sam.gov? So a system for awards management. So whenever you're looking to hire someone, it's always a good idea to check them out on that. Just run them through make sure they're not excluded from participating in any federally funded type programs. Did it go? There we go. So when a school is being considered for approval for participation by the department, whether they're a brand new school for Title IV or are applying for recertification, there are two distinct types of approval: full certification or provisional certification. So there's one case when the type of certification that the school receives is clear. All schools that are being approved to participate for the first time in Title IV are always provisionally approved. What we want to look at that point is we want to see one full fiscal year of compliance audit and financials before we allow a school to become fully certified. When a school applies for recertification, we look at many different things, and we're going to talk about a lot of those in a little bit. But that's what we look at. We look at these different things to determine if we'll offer full certification or provisional certification, and for how long in each case. When we're determining if a school should be provisionally or fully certified, we look at financials and compliance audits. We look at whether they were submitted timely. Did the financials have a passing composite score? Will a letter of credit be required for failing scores? Will the school be required to be on HCM 1, which is Heightened Cash Monitoring 1? Of course, public schools don't have composite scores, but private nonprofits and proprietary schools do. So we also look at if there were any audit findings, and if so, how many or how serious were they? Once we reviewed these things, as well as any recent program review findings, we as analysts can make a recommendation to the team. If a school has had any findings or the program review is pretty bad, that would most likely prompt us to put the school on a provisional status for a period of up to 3 years. Now, if all of the aforementioned items of review look good, little to no findings, good financials, everything submitted on time, then we would most likely fully certify the school. Now keep in mind our preference is that we fully certify you. That means we see your paperwork coming through a lot less often, less work on our side, right? Just like on yours. Cuts down on the workload. So since we don't typically have to touch your EAP again, that is, of course, unless you're reporting changes to us, it makes things go a lot quicker on both sides. So let's talk about some of the basics so we're all on the same page. So many of you know these terms, but let's talk about these acronyms, like the thousands that we already have, right? So they have different meanings and purposes, so we'll talk about each of these individually. So what is an EAP? What is a PPA? And how are these different from the ECAR? So the electronic application is the application for approval to participate in the federal student aid programs. It is located at the website listed there, which is eligcert.ed.gov. That's where you apply for recertification, but that's also where you do all these other changes. Change of officials, adding additional locations, removing additional locations, and any educational program updates. The PPA, or the Program Participation Agreement, is basically a requirement for certified or participating schools to sign, but it is a contract between the school and the department which outlines the regulations that the school is required to follow. How many of you guys have actually sat down and read all 14 to 17 pages of the PPA? Okay, I'm impressed. Pretty good. I had to sit down and read. I mean, there's a lot in there that you really don't realize, and it's not all stuff that the department puts out there. It's other regulatory requirements that schools are expected to follow that are not department regulations. So I would encourage you, if you haven't done so, to take a moment and read your PPA. It'll be very interesting. When the schools go through any process where a new PPA is generated by the department, the previous PPA is void as of the new PPA date. So the PPA is signed by both the school and the department, and the signed PPA must be kept on file by the school along with a copy of your most recent ECAR or Eligibility Certification Approval Report. So keep in mind, the PPA located on the EligCert website, because you guys can get a copy anytime, but the countersigned copy that we send you after your recertification, that's it. So can we get it for you? Yes, but it may take some time. So I would highly suggest that you keep it in a safe place so you know where it's at. And the reason being is that who's going to ask for it? Your auditor? If you get a program review, we'll ask for it. When we do new school visits, which is primarily what I do, I ask the school, where's your PPA? And they always run and scramble for it. I'm like, no. I just need to know that you know where it's at. The PPA also tells you when it expires. And the ECAR has that same information as well. So the ECAR, the Eligibility Certification Approval Report. So that's really a snapshot of the school's participation, your programs, your locations, your officials, everything, all in one neat package. So a current copy of the ECAR must be kept on file by the school, and you want to keep it with your PPA. So anytime you make changes, even if it's in between, let's say that you did your PPA 2 years ago, but since then you made numerous changes to programs, officials, et cetera, every time you do those changes and that application, that EAP is processed, you get a new ECAR, or it's updated. So you want to make sure you print out the most recent copy, because that's what your auditor is going to ask for. So at this time, I'm going to hand off the presentation to my co-presenter, Kai.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Renee said, can you all hear me? Yes, no, you guys are still asleep? Okay, great. Thank you for the thumbs up. We're going to talk about updating the application. Once you have completed your application and you are now participating, whether you are participating on a fully certified PPA or provisional PPA, there are certain actions that happen throughout the course of the years at your institutions that we need to know about and that you have to update us on. Some things are just acknowledgements, and some things that you have to submit to us have to go through an approval process. So we're going to talk about what those acknowledgements are first, and then we'll go through the approval process, what those approval items are. And then there are, depending on the type of certification that you are on, whether it's provisional or whether it's fully certified, you actually could self-certify, or you may have to wait for approval from the department before you do anything. I know in past conferences, this has been an area that, is kind of eye-opening, so I just want to make sure that if you have questions that are specific to your school, as Renee stated earlier, we do have computers set up in the Resource Center where you can come reach out to either one of us or other colleagues so we can actually look up your OPE ID and give you specific information on your institution. So acknowledgements. What kind of acknowledgements do we have to let the department know so we can just say, thanks for telling us? If you change the name of the school, that's something that we would need to know. If you change the address of a main or any of your additional locations, if you closed a previously approved location, if you change from or to clock hours to credit hours, that's something that we also need to know, as we all know that there is a conversion that we actually need to make sure that that program remains eligible. If you decrease in level of educational program offerings, so if at one point you were offering a master's degree, excuse me, or a bachelor's degree, and now you're only offering associate's degree, if you decrease it, this is something that we would also need to be made aware of. Changes to members of the board of directors, as Renee stated earlier, any changes to board of directors, presidents, financial aid officers, CFOs, we need to know all of that because of the whole debarment check. So again, that's the reason why you need to let us know these things to ensure that the people that you have in the higher offices of your institutions, that they are eligible and capable of actually performing these duties at your institution. If a new person or entity acquires 25% or greater of ownership without a change of control. So if there's no change of control and ownership, they're just acquiring more, then we just need to know about it. Finally, any acknowledgements regarding the third-party servicer. So if you have a change in third-party servicers, you have a modified contract, is your third-party servicer doing any additional work? Have you taken some of the items on their contract away and you've actually given it to another third-party servicer? If you're terminating the contract with them altogether, and if the one under contract goes out of business or if they file for bankruptcy. So any changes to your third-party servicer, again, these are some of the things that you would need to let us know within, you have to report that to us within 10 days of the change. So again, if you change the school, you change the address, just know that within 10 days of that change happening, go ahead to elicert.ed.gov, open it up, make the change, and then submit it to us. There's no need to wait for approval for acknowledgement actions. Again, it's just letting us know that these things have taken place. Now, what do we need to know for approvals, or what is it that you all need to know that you all have to send to us for approvals? If your institution is seeking a new location and you would like to offer Title IV at that location, that requires an approval. Most new educational programs, if you have a new educational program that you're looking to offer at your school, that also may need approval. If you're adding programs at a program level offerings at a higher level than you currently have, which is the exact opposite. If you were decreasing, if you had a bachelor's degree and you were going to an associate's degree, that's just an acknowledgement. But if you have an associate's degree and now you want to offer bachelor's, master's, or a PhD program, that is something that you will have to get approval for. Same thing with distance education offered in a state where a school has no physical location. That is something also that you need to get approval for. I believe session 13 talks about distance education. So if you all are offering distance ed, or if you're thinking about offering distance ed, Session 13 here at the conference is talking about that, as there are several new rules that came out about that recently.
I'm going to that session.
I just left it, it was good. Changes in ownership resulting in a change of control. Remember, we only need an acknowledgement if there's, if an entity acquired 25% or more, but there was not a change in control. If there is going to be a change in control, then we would need to, you all would need to have an approval before you can move on with that. There's a lot that goes on in a change of ownership, and also a change in accreditor. So if you guys are, if you're leaving one accreditor and going to another one, that's another one where we would need to make sure that you have the proper accreditor and that they're accrediting the proper, accredit the proper entity. So if they're accrediting program or as an institutional accreditor, so we need to make sure that you have the right one, as well as to make sure that the accreditor is recognized by the Department of Education. If you go to ed.gov and look on accreditors, you can see which accreditors the department actually recognizes. So not all accrediting agencies out there are recognized by the department. So if you're looking to go to a new accreditor for whatever reason, before you start entertaining them, please go on to ed.gov, look under accreditors, and make sure that they are an accreditor that the department recognizes.
Oh, can I add something to that? I'd like to add something to that. So we recently, in the San Francisco office, we had a school that, generally the schools will let us know when they want to make an accreditor change, which is great. That's what we expect you to do. But this particular school didn't notify us beforehand. They went ahead and dropped their old accreditor before getting approval for their new accreditor and lost eligibility. So not to scare you, but I want to make sure this is the type of thing, changing an accreditor is a big deal. So I would encourage you to reach out to your school participation division and talk with them before you do any changes with your accreditation. Sorry.
And also, along with the PPA and ECAR, look at your accreditation letters, see when the expiration is coming around. Accreditation visits, they're not done in a weekend. There's a lot that has to be done with accreditation visits, and there's usually a long time span before you can actually get that approval, before they can come out. So just make sure you keep up with your accreditation letter as well to see when that expiration date is coming up, so you all can get prepared. Especially the new FAAs that are in here, please, please, please go and get the accreditor letter. Reach out to your accrediting agency. This could be the very first time that you've actually met with them or that you've talked to them. Get together with the other officers in your school, the registrar's office, the bursar's office, controller, whichever one you guys have, and make sure that when the accrediting visit happens, that you all have everything that you need to present to them, so that way it can make the visit smooth and you can get your approval letter, your approval letter more quickly than we've seen some take. So we've had horror stories on that, but please, please, please just make sure you pay attention to your accreditation expiration date. So we also have you update the application when you're seeking new locations. On the ECAR that Renee had talked about, it has several sections that are on there. One of the sections, it lists all of your locations. It lists your main location that has been approved. It also lists any additional locations that have been approved to offer Title IV. Just because you open up another location, the approval to offer Title IV does not automatically extend to any new locations that you have opened up. So if your school is growing and you have acquired a building down the street that you can actually sit this new program that that's going there, and they're actually going to be there 100% of the time, you have to let us know and update in order to get that location approved so you can offer Title IV to those students that are sitting at that location for that program. Pretty much what I just said. If 50% or more of an educational program is offered at the new location, the school must report the location to us. In some cases, schools must wait for ED's approval. We'll talk about that in an upcoming slide. If you're not required to wait for approval, you have to report it to us within 10 days of dispersing Title IV aid. So if you have to wait for approval before you can disperse Title IV aid If the school, the main location is provisionally certified, and you will see that on your PPA. The PPA actually says Provisional Certification. You're on some type of heightened cash monitoring or reimbursement, so if your school is on HCM1 or HCM2, or if you're on the reimbursement method. If you're acquiring the assets of another school, you have to wait. You cannot just automatically disperse aid to students of the assets if that school, if we have not gone through the process as far as moving over OPEIDs and transferring funds. Subject to a loss of eligibility for default rate. So if your school is going under, if you have high CDR and you just receive a sanction that you're about to lose eligibility, program eligibility because of high cohort default rates, at that point you cannot just automatically disperse Title IV funds. And if you're required by ED to receive approval before dispersing Title IV, if you look on your PPA, there are provisional codes that are on there. If you have a provisional code that says that you cannot expound in locations until you receive approval from ED, that is another reason why you will not be able to disperse funds to any new locations prior to getting approval from ED. You should talk to your school participation division in the region that you are located. If the location that you are, if the new location that you are trying to acquire was a facility of another school that has since closed, or if you're doing a teach out of a closing school at that school's location, there is an additional process that you have to go through in order to be eligible to acquire that location or to perform the teach out at the location and for those students to still receive aid. So if that is the situation that is going on, please reach out to the SPD as there's additional information that we need from you before we can go ahead and approve that. So we will look at all applications received, whether you can go ahead and disperse right away or if you have to wait to disperse. All applications for new locations, the ED analysts will review. We have to make sure that the location meets all eligibility requirements. We have to make sure that we evaluate the school's administrative and financial capability if the location approval is required. So if you're approved, then you may disperse and continue to disperse funds after receiving the approval letter. If you are not approved after we have reviewed the application for whatever reason, the school is liable for any Title IV disbursements that they have made to students from the onset. So if you started making disbursements in May and you get your denial letter in September, all of the disbursements that you made through there, you are liable for. So what makes a location eligible? What are we looking for when we are reviewing the application to ensure that the new location that you want to add will meet the requirements? One, we have to have the accreditor and state approval. If you are a foreign school, then the foreign government or the Ministry of Education, we would have to have approval from them. We have to make sure that there's a street address. The location cannot have a P.O. box. We have to have a street address for the location. If it's located at a site of a formerly eligible location, it has to meet all the requirements to become an eligible location of another school. So is that location now disassociated with the OPEID that it was associated with before? Is it completely closed down? Has the closure gone through? Or is everything still active in our system? So these are some of the things that we would look at. If it's located at a site of a currently eligible institution, you have to let us know what is that relationship. Is this a partnership? Are you just sharing the building? Do students from that OPEID, can they attend classes in this building? We need to establish what the relationship is first before we can move forward with a location that is attached to a currently operational OPEID number. And if the location is changing affiliation, and we have been notified of the change so that we can do the funds delivery. So if this is a location that is associated with one OPEID and your school is now acquiring it, you will have to let us know. We have to go through a change of affiliation process to ensure that the fund codes have all been moved over properly, as well as the OPEID that the location was formerly under has now been switched to your current main OPEID. So these are the location eligibility requirements.
And if you're thoroughly confused, just call your SPD.
Updating the application, the final update that we actually look for are when you're requesting new educational programs. So the ECAR lists all eligible program level offerings. So this would be, again, if you have an associate's degree, bachelor's degree, master's degree. So all of that is also on the ECAR. It also lists the eligible programs that have been approved. So if you have certificate programs, vocational programs, those programs are also listed on the ECAR. Not all of the programs, so not all of your bachelor's degree programs, not all of your master's degree programs are on there. Just those certificate programs or those vocational programs will be listed on your ECAR. Fully certified schools can make a self-determination of program eligibility in some cases. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And then provisionally approved schools must report and obtain approval before dispersing funds to any new programs that, that you wish to add to your portfolio. So schools must submit an EAP reporting the new educational programs before dispersing funds if the school is provisionally certified, you're receiving funds under reimbursement or any of the other heightened cash monitoring ACM1 or ACM2 conditions. The program is measured by direct assessment. So if you have a direct assessment program, that needs to be submitted in the EAP in order for us to approve it. The program is a CTP program, a comprehensive transition or post-secondary program. You also have to submit an application for that, have it go through the review process before you can start, and have it approved before you start dispersing funds to students in that program. Also, if the school's PPA says approval is required before adding additional programs. Same thing with locations. There are provisional codes on the PPA if you are provisionally certified that states you cannot add new programs without first coming through ED. And depending on what the provisional certification is for, it may be a situation where we ask that you wait to add this new program to have the administrative capability issues rectified before we do that, or if you're showing progress, and at that point, the program may be approved and you can start dispersing aid to that program. The school is in its initial period of participation and subject to a 2-year rule, so new schools, if this is your first year in participating in the program, new programs are subject to the 2-year rule, and if you've gone through the initial application process, the 2-year rule is something that you should be familiar with, where the program has to be operating for 2 consecutive years, 24 consecutive months, and you have continued enrollment in that program. Let's see, so schools can make self-determination of new programs and disperse funds to students if it's not required to receive approval, provided that it determines the programs are eligible and they have received both state and accrediting agency approvals before dispersing funds. This is key, because there are some programs where you have to get, not only do you have to have state approval for the institution, but some programs you need state approval just to offer the program. So just make sure, depending on the state that you live in, that you check with them to make sure you have the proper approvals, because once the information comes into us and you submit the application, this is the documentation that we are going to be asking for. For any new gainful employment, GE programs, the school must submit an EAP within 10 days of the school receiving final approval from both its state and accrediting agencies in order to make the change, and that each program meets all required GE disclosure and certification requirements. Now, this morning, in the general session and the federal update, General Brown and I believe Cynthia had alluded to the new changes that have come about. I believe it was EA 122 that came out in June that let the community know that the GE disclosure and certification requirements have been rescinded effective July 1, 2020. As of July 1, 2019, institutions can early implement this rule. However, you have to early implement the rule. If you have not early implemented, then you are still bound by the requirement that is in effect until July 1, 2020. Now, if you opt in to early implementation, you would let the department know by going into question 69 on the EAP and let us know that pretty much, we're early implementing the GE rescission. And then if at any time during a program review or a school visit, we ask you for the documentation, what we are looking for is some type of correspondence that stated ABC University has, as of this date, has elected to early implement the GE rescission based off of EA 122. It doesn't even have to be that formal, but email, letter, memo, but there has to be something stating as of what date after July 1, 2019, that the school has decided to early implement. And so that way you don't, when you come out for a program review, if you're up for recertification, if you submit any other application that requires approval, these are the things that we're looking at. And if you don't have the disclosure templates up, or if we don't have the certifications, then we won't hold up your application as long as you tell us, hey, by the way, we're early implementing, we don't need to have this, and then we can just move on, and we don't need
Bless
that.
you.
Bless you.
And can I clarify something? So we're telling you that in the process of adding programs, when you're updating the application, that's when you tell us that you are that you're implementing early rescission. We don't want you to tell us now unless you're doing something else. So in other words, just keep that in mind when or if you update your application to add new GE programs, that we then want you to tell us if you're using early rescission. If you're not, you don't have to contact us to tell us that you're choosing to do that if you're not making any changes. Okay? Just to clarify. Although we love to hear from you.
Okay, coming up to the final slides on new educational programs. Reporting self-determined programs on the EAP schools are encouraged to report programs for which they have made a self-determination during the recertification process or sooner, except for GE programs, again, which must be reported in 10 days. And eligibility of these programs will be reviewed prior to the program being added to the ECAR as an eligible program. So again, Ed reviews applications for all reported educational programs to ensure that the reported programs meet the eligibility requirements. Schools' admin and financial capability has been, is set and is in place. And if approved, you can go ahead and disperse or continue dispersing funds after you receive approval, and the same thing with locations. If after you have sent in your application and the application has been denied, then you will be liable for any disbursements that you've made for that new program. So the program eligibility requirements, accreditor and state approvals matches the EAP name and program length. Make sure that the zip code is consistent with the name of the program. Make sure that it leads to a recognized occupation where required, and that's the standard occupational classification, or the SOC code. And those are on the SIP and SOC web. Is really, what is it, just SOC
I can't
dot?
remember.
It's not SOC.ed, it's like SOC.org or
Because
something.
it's another agency.
We'll get that for you, we'll send that out. So to check on that, it meets the minimum weeks and clock or credit hours, and it meets the clock to credit hour conversion where required. Does not exceed by more than 50% the minimum number of clock hours established by the state for training in an occupation for which the program prepares the student, and programs which are required by the state to be based on clock hours can now allow aid to be calculated based on credit hours if the school chooses. So if you want to calculate based on credit hours, and because your state at one point had, required it based on, If the state, ooh, why can I not get this right? I'm sorry, I'm getting sleepy. So, programs which are required by the state to be based on clock hours can now be calculated based on credit hours if the school chooses. So if the state says it has to be clock hours, you can now do it based off of credit hours.
We
Oh my
love
gosh.
that.
Yes, we do.
It's Bureau of Labor Statistics.
Okay.
SOC codes.
SOC code is Bureau of Labor Statistics. Bureau of Labor of Statistics, their website. All right, we're rounding this up. So program eligibility requirements, it also has to meet special requirements if it's a direct assessment program. See DCL Gen 13.10, and that's just a Dear Colleague letter. It came out in the year 2013, and it's the number 10, and that's on the IFAP website. And it meets the special requirements of the CTP program, which is the Dear Colleague letter, Gen 1101. So finalizing the update. This is probably the most important part of the update, is to make sure that you send in all accrediting and state authorization approvals for any changes or additions. Any required documentation that comes up in Section M of the EAP once you go through. And then the most important part is to make sure that you submit the signature page. We have to have the signature page of the application in order for us to actually work on it and process it. You have no idea how many applications we have just sitting because we do not have the signature page from the authorizing officer at your institution. So now I'll give it over to Renee to talk about recertification.
My favorite subject, not. So recertification means that the school is applying for continued participation within the Title IV HEA programs. And just like all communication with the department, this process is completed online via the EAP. It's funny though, sometimes you get schools, especially new schools, they'll call up and say, hey, Renee, just want to let you know that we added a new program, or we've got a new official we just hired. That's awesome, but you got to do it on the EAP. And you're like, oh, that's right. That's right. So let's talk specifically about recertification. So all participating schools must go through recertification. And as we talked about a bit ago, that could be in a year, it could be in 6 years. So ideally, you calendar the date out so you'll remember to complete the EAP. We do send out email reminders to school officials, but that only helps if your school officials are kept up to date and are correct. Hint, hint. In other words, keep them correct, please, because it helps us tremendously, and we don't want a problem where you end up not getting reminded because that official's gone. And then we have had schools lose eligibility that way. Temporarily, of course, but it's critical that a school is aware of when their participation agreement expires and when they need to reapply, and whether that's the owner of the school or the director of financial aid, the president, I mean, not typically the president unless it's a smaller school, but whoever the official is that's responsible for completing the EAP. And there are 2 dates I'd like to call your attention to. And I apologize because when we did this presentation, I was so busy changing other content, I didn't change the date. I should have gotten a new one. So it says 2018 and 2017. But the first date listed is the approval expiration date. So that's the date that your school's PPA actually expires. Very important date. The second date, where this new red arrow is the deadline you need to reapply for recertification by. You'll notice they're 90 days apart. So why is it so critical that you reapply by that recertification date? Well, here's what can happen. If your reapplication date, like you see here, December 31st, 2017, and you totally forgot to get the recertification application completed, or you didn't hit that submit button by December 31st, and your recertification is not complete by the time that PPA expires, then come April 1st in this example, your school will lose eligibility. So if you're ever concerned about timelines and this situation happens to you, please reach out to your school participation division so that we can work with you and get you guys back on board as soon as possible. So last year we had that actually it was 2 years ago. That year we had that very situation at the FSA conference. A school came up to the eligibility table, and it was Kai and I that were sitting there, and because she hadn't heard anything from her SPD about the application, and it turned out, I'm pulling her up in our mainframe, I'm not seeing anything. She hasn't heard anything. I pull it up on the EAP website. She had not hit submit. She literally did everything she was supposed to do, and she did not hit submit. And if that woman is here today, I am sorry again, because she was very, very understandably upset. So it's not a good situation. We don't want to see your school lose eligibility any more than you do. The individual SPDs work really hard in those cases, to ensure the school stays ineligible for a small amount of period of time as possible. But ideally, you want to make sure that your reapplication deadline, that you make that deadline, and then your PPA will extend your eligibility month to month until you can be reapproved. So again, that reapplication deadline is critical. Make that date, and from then on, even if it takes 6 months for us to complete your PPA, your recertification, you're month to month until we get it done, okay? Wait a minute. I didn't skip to the next slide, I'm so sorry. Okay. So what exactly do you need to have ready to complete your recertification application when it's time? So you're going to want to have your OPE ID and your TIN or your EIN number available in order to log in. You're going to want the most recent copy of your accreditation documents, both the approval letter and, if applicable, the list of approved programs. Your most recent copy of state authorization documents, both the approval letter and list of approved programs, if that's applicable for your school. And if they didn't change it. Okay. So there's been some slight changes to this slide. As we talked about earlier with the gainful employment, with the early rescission electronic announcement that came out in June, we talked about it on slide 32. So that's one change to this particular slide. It will be updated and uploaded. The gainful employment early rescission gives schools the opportunity and the option to rescind their participation in the GE requirements for their GE programs. So if you choose to implement that, and then when you're doing your recertification, we're going to ask if you didn't put something on section K, question 69, you know, that's that free form box where you can type a note to us or whatever. You can put something in there that indicates that your school has chosen to early implement the GE rescission, and that's what we need, okay? And then we won't ask for any additional information on that. We may ask for clarification on something else, but that suffices. So the other thing you'll want to talk about is, keep in mind that if you're choosing to, we had actually one school that so far that I know of on our team that is choosing to still cooperate with the GE regulations. I don't know why, but I mean, I wouldn't, but okay. So yeah, it's more work. So that means the reporting still, the disclosure still, so they're choosing to do it. Okay, that's fine. So we had to make sure that their disclosures are updated and uploaded on the website. Okay. Most schools made corrections to their SIP codes when we went into the whole gainful employment thing several years back. But there's still a requirement, so you still want to make sure that the zip codes are correct. And as Cynthia said this morning in general session number 2, the zip codes are changing in 2020. So you'll want to make sure that your zip codes are updated and still valid with all your programs. And for the schools, like the community colleges that have a lot of GE programs, non-degree programs, I'm sorry. But I will tell you that we also check those programs to make the zip codes are correct, to make sure their zip codes are correct also. When applying for recertification, it's always a good time to review your policies and procedures, your Clery Act compliance, and compliance with the other consumer information. There's a document, which I don't know how many of you are familiar with, the Consumer Information Disclosures at a Glance document. It's under Tools for Schools on IFAP. And if you're unsure where that's at, you can check with us afterwards. I'll tell you, it is the best document ever. It's 37 pages last time I looked at. It's updated all the time, and it has all the requirements for consumer information that a school's expected to comply with. So if you haven't seen it, great document, and great document to share with the rest of your staff internally that may not understand how it's not just financial aid that's responsible for this stuff, right? So I wanted to give you guys a quick look at what the EAP website looks like if you, for whatever reason, are new to the game and haven't seen the EAP website. These next few slides will walk you through at least a little bit of it with the login process. So in this slide, you see the EligCert website, and we call it EligCert because that's the name of the website. It's eligcert.ed.gov. And that's where the EAP is located. So if you look at the red arrow, that's where you would click on in order to be able to log in. So the next screen that pops up, you'll need to select one of the links on the left of the screen. Oops, nope, just kidding. So this box pops up asking you for a user ID and a password. So one thing to keep in mind is the user ID and password is specific to your school and not a user. So I know a lot of times we'll get, when we have someone that's not familiar with it and they come on and at a new school and they've never been in a director role before and never had to do this, and they call and, I need to update this, I need to add myself as the new director, but I can't log in. I don't know what to do. So it's the user ID and password, we'll talk about that in a second. So but the username is always Ed, starts with Ed, either all caps or lowercase, and then your full OPE ID number. It's always the OPE ID number for the main campus. In other words, ending with a 00. Are we at question time? We're at question time, all right? We're gonna hurry up. I'm talking too much. So section A, so once you log in with the user ID, the password is the ED also, and then the TIN number or EIN number. So if you need help as you're going through the EAP and you have questions on the additional sections, this is a great help section that you can go to. So you want to, again, please make sure you keep your officials and contact information up to date. Documents to send in for recertification, the most recent copy of your accreditation documents, your state authorization documents. Copies of some policies may be asked for in advance. We're starting to do that, but just on a limited case, so you don't have to send them in anymore for all situations, which is nice. Section L with an original signature, Section M as well if you're a proprietary institution, and Form 501c3 if you're a private nonprofit institution. So how do you know if a recertification application process is complete on our side? Well, you'll get an email from the department that tells you what the next steps are. So you're going to have 30 days to print out 2 copies of your new PPA, sign them both, send them in to us. You'll get one copy back. That's a copy that I talked about in the beginning of the presentation. That's the countersigned one. You'll want to keep that in a very safe place. You'll want to pay close attention to the expiration date of your new PPA and mark the next application deadline on your calendar. And note whether the school has been approved for full participation or provisional participation. And a provisional, why? You'll want to know why. I thought we were running out of time. I was all panicked. So avoiding common mistakes. So here's the thing. We all make mistakes. When completing something that's important especially, right? But remember that nothing is etched in stone. Changes can be made to the EAP after you submit the application. No need to worry. So to avoid common mistakes when you're working on the EAP, you'll want to select, okay, when you're working on the EAP and it's not for recertification, you need to select and identify each purpose of the application. So if you're reporting new officials, if you're adding a new location, if you're updating programs, totally fine. You can do 15 things on there, we don't care. But because you're letting us know all the different things that you're wanting to do, fine. If it's a recertification application, we expect you to do that anyway. So all we want you to mark is recertification, that one thing. You can make, again, 15 updates, we don't care. Anything that needs to be changed, but just mark recertification. That helps us on our side to prioritize which level of analyst gets your school assigned to them. That's all it's for. But when in doubt, if you're not sure, contact your school participation division. We are more than happy to answer your questions. And we do really try to respond to the schools as quickly as we possibly can, usually within 24 hours, ideally sooner, like we answer the phone. So whenever you have officials at your school that need to be updated, you'll see that there's a radio button that you check to indicate that there's a change, and then you type, after you make that, hit that little button, then you type the new official's information. Please make sure to provide your officials direct lines. That's very helpful for us because when we have a question about your EAP or we have a student complaint or some other reason why we're trying to reach out to your director or other officials, we really need to be able to reach you a little bit quicker than going through your long voice response unit, your VRU. Sometimes it gets a little frustrating. If you've had a board member change and need to make updates, please, if you remember nothing else from this presentation, please don't type over board members. You have to end date those board members, then add the new ones down below in the blank areas. Don't ever type over those officials. The board member, it makes a nightmare on our side. It's just the way the systems are right now. So just do them separately. You'll want to ensure that your CIP codes are correct, as we talked about. You want to ensure that you go through all the sections as you're completing the recertification application, make sure any updates are done as needed. In Section K, question 69, you'll need to add emergency contact information for your school, and it needs to be for the officials that are listed in questions 10 through 12. So we need at least 2 officials' emergency contact information. We need their name, their title, personal either cell phone number or home phone number, and personal email, not the school stuff. Because think about all the different different emergencies we've had with the weather and so forth over the last few years. We've had a lot of cases where we've had natural disasters or the fires in California or flooding somewhere. Yeah, hurricanes. Oh my gosh. So it's important that we know how to get a hold of some official at the institution, and we do. If any of you guys have been at one of those schools that we have reached out to, we always reach out to make sure what you guys need from the financial aid perspective to help your students. As I shared earlier, there are times when schools complete all the information but don't hit that submit button. Please don't be one of them. That woman was inconsolable 2 years ago, crying, and it was very hard to watch. Until we receive all of the required documents, such as the signature page, which is Section L, your accreditation and state approval documents, any application is not considered complete, including recertification. So please make sure you get all your supporting documents in timely as soon as you hit that submit button. Bless you. So, it is time for the question and answer section of our presentation, and we ask that you please step to one of the microphones to ask your, it looks like we only have one microphone this year. If you have questions that are really specific to your school, we can chat afterwards, or we can talk about it in the main resource center. We do hope the presentation was helpful for you and that you enjoy the rest of the conference. If you have questions and would like to stay, or if others have questions, awesome. This is the SPD list with the phone numbers for the division director at the top, who's actually my boss. She's doing double duty right now as our regional director and as the national director. And then each region's compliance managers. So feel free, look at your region, write down their information, reach out if you need, because that's what we're here for. And we want to thank you for attending. Anybody have any questions, anything they'd like to?
Before we start with the questions, there was something that I noticed in this presentation where we are asking you all to add things to question 69. Question 69 is a free form box, but it is not infinite. It only accepts 2,000 characters. So as you're going through and you notice that there are certain things that you need to add in the current application that you are in, please be mindful of the words that you use, because after 2,000 characters, it'll let you type it, but we only pull in the first 2,000 characters. So we know that that is something that we have to get updated, but this is something that we discovered just on a whim because we actually missed some important information that the school submitted to us. So whereas we say add all of this stuff to question 69, it's only limited to the first 2,000 characters that will actually be imported over to our system. Hello.
Hi, my name is Valerie Richard. I'm with a private not-for-profit school. And my question is for recertification, the accreditation letters that you need, are they just the general college? We're a health sciences college, so we have a lot of program accreditations, nursing, OTA, things like that. Do we have to send all of those program accreditations as well, letters?
Do you want me to take it? Mm-hmm. Good question. So whenever you have, as a private nonprofit school, usually you have institutional accreditation as opposed to programmatic. And you may have programmatic as well. What we care about is what you're using for financial aid. Okay. And that would be your institutional accreditation. And generally, as we all know, institutional accreditors don't approve program by program. Yeah. So we won't expect to see from you, ABC University has added 5 non-degree programs. We're not going to expect to see that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Artie, and I'm from Henderson State University in Arkansas. Hi. I have 2 questions. One is very quick. And is any time too early to do reapplication? I have a notice that we have to have ours in by March 31 for a June 30th deadline. Is it too early to get that done now?
You know what? There's a really bad echo in here. So the question, let me just make sure I understand the question. Yeah. What is the question? Is it what's too early to do your recertification application?
Correct.
I would say 4 months before is probably okay.
Okay, thank you.
As long as you don't do it 6 months before the expiration.
Okay, thank you. And then my other question is, we are a state institution, but we are now joining the rest of Arkansas State University system. Now, is that really considered a change of ownership?
Oh.
You said that now you all are being absorbed by the state of Arkansas?
Well, we already were a state institution, but we were just operating independently. Now we're going to join the ASU system. Just kind of, we're not changing our name, we're not changing.
That's just a change of affiliation. That's not a change in ownership.
Excellent,
so what
thank
would they
you.
need to do to report that, though?
The state, it depends on if you guys are joining the state, it depends on if you are joining it just as a system, as a group, or if you are joining, meaning that if you're not changing your name, you're not changing anything, you are now just a part of this group, the state group, there isn't anything that would need to be done as far as state is concerned, if they were private.
Maybe financials. They're public. Are you public? Where'd she go?
Yes, already state public.
Where is she? Oh, there she is.
You know, let's talk afterwards.
Hi, I represent a
Hi.
proprietary institution. I have a question about the self-determination. I was wondering if you can elaborate on that. It says that the institution does not require to receive approval in order to start a program. So,
You know, can you step a little closer? I know it's a cross
Sorry.
between not being able to hear and the echo in here.
so I wanted to ask you to elaborate on the self-determination process. So I know you complete the EAP, and then you add the change in the program, new program, and then what happens? Do I have to wait for an approval? Or here it doesn't say I do not have to. What is the process for self-determination?
So the process for self-determination
Self-determination
as a
for,
proprietary school for adding new programs, correct?
Right.
so what is the process for proprietary schools for adding new programs? Can you self-certify, or do you have to wait for approval?
That's your question?
Is that the question?
Well, the question is, here it says that the school may make a self-determination of eligibility without having to wait for an approval
Right.
with certain criteria. How does that process work with the EAP? So as representing an institution, I complete EAP, I add that new program is now not approved, I add the new program, and then what happens? Does it automatically, do I have to wait?
Oh, okay, so you're talking about apply and wait. So when you go into the EAP and you add the new program, and what you're saying, you want to know what does the process look like for after adding the program and then waiting to hear back for the approval?
But here it says I don't have to wait for an approval. Here it says I don't have to wait for an approval. It's a self-determination process.
Based off of your based off of your PPA. So depending on what it says on your PPA, if you're a fully certified institution and it says that you do not have to wait, then you can self-certify. What happens is that you would submit the application. Within 10 days after you have dispersed funds, we would look at the application, and then we would make the determination if the program that you are dispersing funds to is actually eligible to receive it. You would then receive a letter from us stating that, congratulations, your program has been approved. There's nothing that needs to be done. You can continue dispersing aid. If at the time you receive a letter that says, based off of the documentation you've submitted, this program cannot be approved at this time, then you will be liable for any disbursements that you have made.
So it's better to wait for an approval first.
I'm sorry, say that one more
It's
time.
better to wait for an approval to
You said-
avoid the risk.
You said it's best to wait for the approval?
Correct.
Again, it really just depends on the school and what your PPA says. If the program that you are applying for approval for, if you have all of the documentation that you need, your school is in good standings, there's no financial administrative capability issues, then I don't see a problem with you going ahead and dispersing those funds.
Okay, all right, thank you.
If it's only at the time during review, if there is something, it's usually within the paperwork that shows that the program didn't meet eligibility, and to be honest with you, we will actually tell you that and give you time to try to rectify that. But if it cannot be rectified, then at that point, we will let you know it can't be rectified, the program is not approved, and you'll be liable for any disbursements that you have made.
Hi, I'm at a private nonprofit school. I am very new to the EAP, ECAR, all of that, so I'm just trying to wrap my head around it. I may have misunderstood you, so I need some clarification on like reporting programs. So like do all of our bachelor's programs, all of our master's programs, everything gets reported, and if we offer, for example, we added some programs that were very similar to other programs. They just kind of changed classes up a little bit, but it's just a separate major. So do we report that, or how does that work? Because I kind of understood like anything that was originally like GE has to be reported, and then if we have bachelor's, master's, then how does that work for that umbrella, like all the different majors in a master's or bachelor's?
Bachelor's and masters don't have to be
Yeah, so, okay, so with a private nonprofit or public institution, the school does not have to report, as long as the school is approved for that level of education, so bachelor's, associates, bachelor's, master's, et cetera, they don't have to individually get approval or list out their individual degrees. But what I've found is what's interesting is there are some schools and some directors, based on prior experience or what have you, that want to list out all their degrees. And totally fine. There are other situations where you as a new director may pull up the EAP or the ECAR, and you're gonna look at that ECAR and you say, well, I'm a private nonprofit, but I see some of the programs are listed here. Why aren't all the programs listed here? It's possible that that institution had at one time been provisional, and one of the provisional requirements was that in order to get approval, in order to be approved for a new program, they had to request that approval, so we would make them list it out. So that's what can happen sometimes. It can be kind of confusing. But if you're approved for that level of education, you don't have to list out. Proprietary institutions have to list out all programs, regardless of educational level or degree or non-degree. Does that answer your question?
Yes,
Okay,
thank you.
thanks.
You got about 3 more minutes.
Thanks, you guys, and you're still all awake, or unless you're falling asleep, and that's okay. Have a great conference. Stay warm, not too warm.